Good morning and happy Thursday. Let's see. ES has been on a little bit of a run this morning, but there actually hasn't been a lot of crazy action considering what we've seen so far this week. And so before we start looking at the charts, I was just looking at some news today to see if we have anything big that we need to be worrying about. There's really not much. Like it almost seems like every single FOMC member is gonna be speaking today throughout the day, which is fine. We usually don't see too much movement whenever those guys start yapping. Um, but I did notice yesterday that the White House announced that Trump will be speaking today at 11 a.m. So that'll be pretty shortly after market open. I'm gonna try to look into that to see if he's like what he's actually talking about. But otherwise, besides that, we don't really have any big news today. Tomorrow we do have our consumer sentiment at 10 a.m. But should be pretty quiet on the news front today. Let's go take a quick look at ES. We can look at it through Milk's yellow box chart. We've actually had pretty clean price action on ES overnight. So we're looking here, guys, at our 15-minute chart. We're up about a quarter of a percent on the morning. But one of the things that I want to note is that while ES has been playing fairly well overnight, I do want to note that we immediately had a yellow box loss with this 15-minute break and hold above our yellow box and then an immediate shoot down to tap the bottom of our average range. Um, the other thing I do think is worth noting is secondary pivot was disrespected pretty well last night. We didn't really get any initial bounces off of it. We saw some very, very light resistance as we came back up from that bottom of average range support area. But again, pretty much broke right above it without too much issue. Um, was able to come back up, and now we did hit the top of our average range. So far, this pivot and seller positioning is technically holding up. Um, that is one of the things I want to say though, like because we've seen some disrespect on both the yellow box and what our secondary pivot was doing. We could potentially be a little bit cautious today about the levels that we're seeing on this chart. I will continue to be watching this pivot and seller positioning area to see if we get positive reaction to it or if we're simply rejecting due to our average range resistance as well. So one of the things I will say though, we'll look for levels kind of within the yellow box, but whenever I see Milk's yellow box chart that has pivot and a secondary pivot in a relatively tight range like this, kind of like within yellow box and within our average range, this whole area for me is kind of a no-go for trading. Personally, I'm not a range trader, so I don't really like trying to take moves that are kind of within these areas, especially if we start seeing that we're having a lot of messy movement between them and don't want to be breaking out of them one way or the other. The other thing we can look at here, just very, very briefly, is that um, where IV walls are positioned, we do have technically a little bit more room to the downside based on where IV walls are positioned. Right now to the top side, they start at 68.58, but on the bottom end, there's support all the way down to 67.80. So currently there's a little bit more opportunity to the downside. One of the things that I do want to note, our ceiling and floor have a little bit of conflicting information. This is pretty similar to what our charts looked like yesterday overnight, where our floor was technically less bearish than where our ceiling was. So I'm not going to spend too much time looking at where these are currently placed. As 15 minutes into open, we're going to be getting updated data to see if we have bullish or more bearish positioning from our market makers throughout the day. So just a quick like review of Yellow Box. I don't really think it played super well yesterday. Like the levels in general are being respected in terms of volatility, but pivot is not really being respected too much as of yet. So I will still be observing that and not be taking any sort of crazy trades like immediately off of this seller positioning area, for example. Okay, so we're currently trading at 68.39. Let's go hop into our fractals. One of the things that I think is worth noting is we've been a little bit back and forth this week on our daily. Um, right now, with our vector currently trading at 68.40 on the wave one daily, we are hitting a little bit of a resistive zone with our vector since we're trading at 68.39. We aren't very high. We're only potentially going to be making an H2 today. So when we go into options analyzer, that's not going to be anything we want to look at too closely in terms of like, oh my gosh, we have a very low probability of making another higher high today. Going into kind of the H1, H2 areas, I don't really have like a large amount of, bullish or bearish intention based on just this H2 starting to form. One of the things we can look at to the top side though is that yesterday we did create an open state that's now positioned at 68.57, 73, so almost 50, 58, sorry, 68.58. And then I think it was early last week we created another open state at 68.64, which is paired with our 80% odds. So these are two areas that I think we should consider a little bit. One of the reasons I like it is because one, these two open states are really, really close to each other. So having stacked open states on one time frame is always something I do like to see, especially something as significant as our wave one daily. So basically this past week we have struggled to get out of this range is kind of what we could consider. And unless we can actually break out of this range to the top side, these two open states are probably pretty promising. The other thing we could look at to the bottom side, and it's really, really far away, but if we do end up making um, starting a bearish wave cycle, there will be a couple of very tightly stacked open states to the bottom side as well that we can consider. But right now, I'll be considering the 57.73 and 64.26. So let's go into some of our smaller time frames and see if we have any confluences in that area because this zone's a little bit big. So 57, 58. It's a 7 point zone. You could argue maybe like a 6.5 point zone. Um, let's actually mark it. Let's mark it right off the bat and see if we have anything else in here. So let's do 57. Let's do 57.5 to 64.25. Well, let's do 57.5 to 65. So we have room to fill this open state. 57.5 to 65. Let's go do that. Oh, and I love that because that's right within our IV wall. Okay, let's go make this open state. 57.5 to 60. Let's do 65 just to be clean. Okay, cool. So we can take a note that we have our wave one daily there. I really do like that we have a couple stacked open states on something as large as the wave one daily paired with our 80% odds. So, and again, guys, right? You know me that when I do look at things like the 80% odds, like I would never be trading off of like a level because it was at the 80% odds. Um, because right, the probability of continuation to the upside being that close to our pivot is pretty high, right? But to have that additional confluence was just something nice. But I would never be like looking at our 80% odds as a resisted area. Okay. 7 wave 60. So our vector on the 7 wave 60 is at 68.27, which is good to know that I think we're going to be seeing support. Our vector is probably going to be supportive on most of our time frames right now. We did make an open state. When did we make this open state? Let's look at this. At 68.43. When did we make this guy? Oh, sure. We made it like 45 minutes ago. Okay. So we had an open state at 68.43. We don't really have anything else on the 7 wave 60. Um, probably until 68.89 is what I would be paying attention to. We do have a lot of resistive clusters though above that 68.43 zone. Um, because we made this open state so recently, I'm probably not going to mark it. Let's can look at our linear chart just to see. So yeah, we made this one right here when we kind of tap that top of average range resistance. So I won't be paying attention to that one just because it is so recent right now, but good to know. We have our vector here at 68.27 for potential support. Okay. Okay, so 68.31 is the vector on our 20 wave 15. And we have that same open state that we've just formed. Um, One thing that we can look up to, there's a decent amount of blank space on the 20 wave 15 minute. Um, I know Dark Horse, that wave one is really nice. We do have some blank space on the 20 wave 15 after 68.44.50, which is that open state we just created, all the way up to 68, 58, 76 is where our 10% odds is, which is a little bit annoying because that 58, 76 area, I think is just above where our wave one daily open state clusters are. So we'll keep looking to see if we have any other opportunity. But the interesting part here is on our 20 wave 15 minute, the last bullish wave that we did make that has an open state remaining was an H18 all the way up, available at 68.88. That high of day that we formed to make that open state was back on November 5th. That was that 68.58, probably high a day that we saw there. So that's currently printing at 68.88 and a half for our 2%. So it's a little bit higher. We have this 58 zone. We can come back and mark it later if that is the case and start really looking at it closely when we do get into New York trading. But that's suddenly going to become like a 7 or 8 point zone if we do print this. So we do have something on the 20 wave, but we'll hold off on marking it. Okay. Same on the 10 wave 15 minute. We have that same open state up at 68, 88, 71, which was that open state we created yesterday around lunchtime. Um, we do have our 5% odds at 68.51 and our 10% odds at 68.49. So that's a pretty dense cluster of odds that we're seeing. Again, with a decent amount of blank space above this zone. So if we do want to play that considered zone that the Wave 1 daily's been staying in for the past week and a half, I think this 49 to 51 area is pretty good. So I do like that the 10 wave 15 has confluence with that. So I'm going to go mark that on my chart real quick just so we can remember what we're doing here. So the 10 wave 15 minute and the Wave 1 daily. 50. Oh, guys, I stand corrected. Hang on, I stand corrected. For some reason, I thought we made our zone at 45. Let me go back to our 20 wave. So this is actually really good. This 10% odds is in confluence. 68.58. So sorry, guys. That's actually like right at the start of this wave one daily. Okay, so let me make notes here because obviously my brain is not thinking very well today. Let's see. Text. Okay. So we have stacked OS on wave one daily. And then we do have our 10% odds on our 20 wave 15. There we go. We'll keep adding to this list because obviously I can't remember what I'm talking about. Stacked OS on our wave one daily, 10% odds on our 20 wave 15. So then now let's go back to that 10 wave 15 and make sure I'm not crazy here. Okay, so these are actually a little bit before zone. Okay, that's okay. Let's go check out our 7 wave 5. Okay, so we are seeing currently vector sitting at 68.39, and we have that open state we've recently formed. Another intermediate open state at 68.50. And then we do have two open states up here, flat and past the 5% odds at 68.64. Excuse me. At 68.68. So those are kind of nice how they're stacked pretty close together. We even have one all the way up at 68.73. So this is a pretty decent amount of open states on our smaller time frames. So 64 and 68, we're seeing some open states. I'm going to make a little line up here. The 7 wave 5 minute is so just the line is going to be a little bit higher, but kind of show that our 7 wave 5 minute is up in this zone. It's 64. So we'll do 7 wave 5 minute open state and 5% odds. Okay. Seeing some pretty good density in this zone, I would say. See what else we got. So 50 wave 1, let's go look at our really tiny time frames. Again, open state at 55, so 56, and then 64 is what we're seeing our 5% odds at. 58.64. Okay. So let's go mark that again. It's going to be that same area. 58.64. So then we can do 50 wave 1 minute, OS and 5% OS. Pretty good density on this area. I do really like it too because it is paired with our IV walls. The one thing we can say, right, with was kind of most for most of these, like having the zone from 57 to basically 65, 65, 25. It's a little bit of a big zone. So I think what we're going to want to be doing is watching price action and probably marking out exactly where all of those different open states are on the various charts to make sure, like, if the strategy is to just go off of that first wave one daily open state, I think definitely get into that trade right away. But I'll probably be watching price action just a little bit because this zone is pretty large. If you guys are tolerant of having like a 7 point stop loss, then pop off. But we could see if we could try to get a little bit of a sniper entry when we actually get to New York session. One of the things I'll be really curious on too is if our ceiling would come down for any reason. Um, but I highly doubt it does. It usually never collapses during New York session. If anything, it expands out. So I do like this zone for potential top side. With that being said, though, because we have a decent amount of blank space above a lot of these zones, especially on our lower time frames and our mid time frames, getting above it, we do have some decent room to the upside. So, depending on what position kind of plays itself out today, we can kind of decide if we want to try to hold for long continuation or grab that rejection down to vector and then see where we go from vector. But right now, our vector's positioned at around 68.35. We've got 68.39, 68.31, pretty big range. 30, oh God, 68.25 on the 7 wave 60. Oh, pretty big range, 68.39. I would look at maybe 35 to 39 on our vector right now. We do have a couple of like the more outlier vectors down at like 31 and 25. But we could look to 35 to 39 for a decent amount of stacked vectors to see if we have any support there. 35 to 39. So we're kind of like well within that right now, which is right over this pivot, which is kind of another reason that pivot's not really giving me too much confidence to take any sort of like measured move back to the downside. But that's where our pivot is. We can go look to see if we have any opportunity to the downside on any levels. But because we're trading above our pivot on most of our fractal timeframes, I'm not going to be spending too much time looking. But we can see that if we do get below any of those areas, 7 wave 60, see, it has a couple open states at 67.90, 67.50. Let's go look at like the 20 wave 15. 67.99 has an open state on the 20 wave 15. Um, One of the things I want to say though is if we do revise under pivot, these numbers could change. So I'm probably not going to mark any bounce levels until we do get some sort of revision below pivot if we do get there. So that's kind of why I don't try to look at like range numbers too much, especially if we're consistently like above pivot on any of our time frames. So we won't be spending too much time looking to the downside until or if we get a revision below pivot here. But yeah, guys, one of the things I will say is because the wave one daily is pretty neutral right now, like we don't have a high probability of like reversion or we're not super overextended on the wave one. Um, I'm not going to be worried too much about like being like, oh, like, I'm very, very bearish today or I'm very, very bullish today. Like we've been ranging pretty strongly on the wave one daily. So I'm not, I don't really have any sort of bias one way or the other today, I would say. I'm just going to look at a few more things on the wave one, look at a few more larger time frames to see if there's anything we're potentially missing. Yeah, that 57.73 to 64 and a quarter. That's pretty cool to see stacked open states like that on the wave one daily because we've been ranging so hard. So this is definitely going to be like my A plus setup for the day, which is pretty easy, honestly. Like this was a pretty easy charting session today because we saw pretty good obvious levels, and with that blank space above, if this trade loses, then like we know that we could kind of be one and done today on our A plus setups. Um, and what I'll be doing is continuing to watch our vector cluster to see if we get any reconciliation on that whole zone, just getting a little bit tighter instead of being as completely wide as it is. So um, we will see though. I do like opportunities for shorts if we can get up there to get us down to our IV wall and our floor to the downside. So if we could get an IV wall touch and then a reversion down, we could have a pretty good day. So, but as always, guys, we're going to be practicing our risk management if we do take any trades in that zone, making sure that we're very aware of whatever stop loss you guys are choosing to place and taking profits incrementally. So don't be trying to shoot for the moon every time you take a play. Like, make sure you lock in your profits and actually preserve any profits that you do make, and set yourself break even after a reasonable amount of time. So, all right, guys, this was a super easy charting session today. I think we're going to be a little bit shorter, but I'm going to go make some breakfast and see if we get any reversions on our ceiling and floor when New York session starts. But otherwise, guys, we'll see you in live trading in Ascend. Otherwise, be safe, practice really good risk management, and we will talk to you guys tomorrow morning. See ya.